Back when the West was wild, when cowboys didn't dance, there was a group of outlaws known only as the Vanderland Gang. Led by an outlaw known as Dutch Van der Linde, this gang of misfits traveled throughout the southwestern United States in the late 19th century in search of gold and freedom. They robbed trains, held up banks and stagecoaches, and were known to cause general havoc wherever they went. In 1899, the gang finally met their match in the form of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, following a botched robbery of a ferry in the town of Blackwater. Within months, much of the gang was dead or in the wind, and their outlaw ways had come to an end. They were one of the last major gangs of outlaws that called the West home. But were they bad people? Red Dead Redemption 2 was a game released by Rockstar Games in 2018. It follows the downfall of the Vanderland Gang, and specifically the main protagonist, Arthur Morgan, over the course of about a year. Normally, when we think of good guys, we think of the idyllic man in the white hat, riding in to save the day. He doesn't rob, cheat, or steal, and he always arrives just in time to stop the bad guy from doing those things. That is, of course, the way it goes in movies and books. In real life, things aren't always black and white, and ethics are often bent to fit the situation. Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of those games that runs closer to real life than a fantasy when it comes to good versus evil. While it may seem at first that you don't have a lot of choices as the player, the truth is a lot more nuanced. See, as you play, you will notice this little meter that keeps popping up whenever you do various things. It's accompanied by a little symbol and a sound that indicates whether the action you just took was honorable or dishonorable. On a single playthrough, you might not notice any impact from this meter. You could, in theory, finish the game and not even realize your choices made a difference. Now, if you know anything at all about the game, you're probably aware that the level of your honor affects various cutscenes, as well as opening up some extra missions, changing the way Arthur addresses NPCs, and even changing the end of the game. One thing that most people probably don't think much about, however, is that this mirrors real life and brings into question everything we think of when it comes to good versus evil. Outlaws, or criminals, must always be evil, right? If that's the case, how could Arthur Morgan, or anyone in the Vanderland Gang, possibly be anything other than bad? When we first meet the Vanderland Gang, they are fighting a blizzard in the mountains as they work to escape the lawmen of Blackwater. They had been camped outside that small town for a while, and just finished a job where they were robbing a ferry. We find out through dialogue that an innocent girl was killed during the robbery, and several members of the gang had been wounded or left behind in the aftermath. This opening starts to paint the picture of who Dutch Van der Linde is, and what the gang is like in general. As the opening chapter progresses, we meet several members of the group and learn that things aren't always as simple as they seem. There's a dynamic to these characters, and each has their own reason for being with the gang. As we move through the chapters of the story, we follow the gang from location to location as they work to make enough money to escape the law and gain the one thing that we all yearn for: freedom. They want the freedom to live as they choose, to be able to go where they please when they please, and to be able to earn a living through hard work. We get to know more about each member of the gang, and by the later chapters, many of them even begin to feel like a real family. You have choices as the player throughout the game, mainly focused on how you think certain missions should be approached, but also about what you want to do between missions. You can rob whoever you want, hold up banks, shoot anyone, hunt, fish, gamble, and participate in a ton of other miscellaneous activities. You even have some freedom during the missions to cause more or less harm to civilians as you rob them. Each of these actions brings a consequence, usually in the form of an increase or decrease to your honor meter. Beside the main story missions, there are a number of side missions and a metric ton of radiant quests. The side missions and radiant quests are not required to complete the game, and you could technically finish the story without doing anything extra. One set of missions you can do revolves around one Leopold Strauss. Mr. Strauss is a member of the gang who focuses primarily on loan sharking, and he asks you to be his muscle and recover the money he has lent out to people who were unable or unwilling to pay it back. Most of these missions are optional, though a couple are mandatory, and one of them actually results in Arthur coming into contact with a man called Mr. Downs, who is very sick. You're sent to collect for Mr. Downs in Chapter 2, as one of the early Strauss missions, and it's clear he isn't doing well. No matter what you try, you wind up beating him until he begins coughing up blood. Some of this blood winds up on Arthur, and ultimately results in his death from tuberculosis at the end of the game. The first couple of times I played through the story, I avoided most of Strauss's missions, because I wanted to be a good guy, and collecting the debts didn't feel right. In more recent playthroughs, I've actually taken to trying some of them out, and there are actually some really cool stories buried in them. The moral or immoral nature of loan sharking is a subject for a video all on its own. But the real reason I bring up the Strauss missions is because later on in the story, you're able to actually forgive the debts Strauss has gathered and even make somewhat of amends with Mrs. Downs following the death of her husband. These optional quests are only available if you have high honor, though. Likewise, the main story has several endings and optional choices based on your honor level. But can an outlaw really have high honor? So that brings us back to the main topic. As Arthur, you make decisions on who to help, who to shoot, who to rob, but doesn't shooting even one person make you bad? What about robbing a bank? Is it even possible to be a good guy in the light of all these obviously bad deeds? Or, just maybe, there are no good or bad people. Maybe we're looking at it the wrong way. Humanism, for instance, judges actions based on the overall effect on individuals and groups. The goal is to improve the overall well-being of humanity, with the ultimate goal being to maximize well-being wherever possible. Looking at things from that perspective, we can look at Arthur Morgan as an example and determine which of his individual actions improve or diminish well-being. Even this is complicated, however, when you really dig into things like robbing a bank. When Arthur participates in a bank robbery, he is diminishing the well-being of those in the bank, having guns pointed at them, as well as those who keep their money in the financial institution being robbed. At the same time, though, he's also improving the well-being of the members of the gang who need food and medicine to survive. You'll notice the honor meter doesn't change one way or the other, however, in the course of story missions like robberies. If you're sent to hold up a train or a wagon, your honor will stay exactly where it is unless you take an unnecessary step to harm someone. Even shooting the lawmen who give chase after the mission inevitably goes wrong doesn't affect your overall honor. Maybe that is due to the overall balance of well-being. If the well-being of the gang is increased while the overall well-being of the individuals being robbed is decreased, maybe the ledger balances out. Money can be replaced, with valuables being covered through insurance claims and other means. The lawmen shot in the escape attempt could be seen as the instigators, almost always being the first to shoot. So Arthur and the gang shooting back could be seen as justified. Arthur's honor might drop a bit when robbing individuals outside of missions, but that could be explained by him acting selfishly and winds up being balanced out by the positive movement of the honor meter when he donates to the gang's camp fund. Building on the idea of a ledger, we might be inclined to jump out of the game and into the real world to see how a system like that holds up. On the one hand, you could think of life as having a ledger like the honor meter in Red Dead Redemption 2. Maybe every choice you make adds or subtracts from that ledger, and in the end you are judged based on the overall sum of those totals. Shows like The Good Place have used this idea as a concept in the past, and to a point it kind of makes sense. Using a ledger means that you can balance out the bad with the good. As an outlaw, you could rob a bank and make up for it by using some of the money to feed the poor. Robin Hood, the fictional character created by Sir Walter Scott, was famous for stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But does doing good really make up for the bad? In practice, it's pretty clear that no amount of good can outdo certain things. Legally, for instance, you could spend your whole life doing nothing but good and never breaking any laws, but no matter how much good you've done, breaking a single law could land you in jail for life. But then we also need to explore the aspect of the law. Is breaking the law bad? If the Vanderland Gang is breaking the law constantly, is that enough to say that they're bad for doing so many quote-unquote bad things? As a society built around the rule of law, are we just supposed to accept every law as good, seeing those who flout the laws as bad? If you rob a bank and only shoot those who shoot you first, what makes you the bad guy? In the context of a game, the rules are hard-coded. The lawman who fires at you on a mission was created specifically to do so. What about real life, though? No one makes the right decision every single time. All of us have done things that others might consider bad or wrong. At the end of the day, morality is subjective, and there isn't any concrete good or bad that makes you individually a good or bad person. Now, you might argue, as others have, that morality is objective. Most of the time, this argument comes from a religious sense, where a god has set down what is moral and what isn't. I set this argument aside because either the god in question has set the moral standard, meaning that the standard is subjective to their will, or they are simply relaying a moral standard, in which case they are really just the messenger for someone else's subjective standard. Overall, no matter how you slice it, your moral standards are directly related to the society you are a part of, and those standards change over time. So what does that mean for our hero Arthur, and by extension the members of the Vanderland Gang? Well, he lives with a ledger that fills or empties based on an objective standard set by developers with a subjective standard for morality. He isn't good or bad, but his actions, directed by the player, are considered good or bad based on this standard. Like in real life, he has no way of knowing for certain what the eventual outcome of those actions might be, and he can only decide what to do based on the desired outcome and hope that it works out. As an example, one could argue that beating Mr. Downs to try and drive home the point that he needs to fulfill his debt obligations was wrong, if for no other reason than that the injuries Arthur inflicted may very well have sped up Mr. Downs' demise. That action also led directly to Arthur getting sick and to Mr. Downs' wife and son being driven into an even worse situation than they started in. No one in the situation was good or bad, but they all made decisions that, in hindsight, can be judged as positive or negative based on the increase or decrease in well-being. Those actions were also the result of prior actions, building up to the end result where the well-being of Arthur and the Downs family are negatively impacted. At the end of the day, people aren't good or bad. Actions are what count. And we should all be aware of how our actions affect those in the world around us. We might not have an honor meter to guide us like Arthur does, but we can still try to leave a positive mark. I'm going to be expanding on topics like this in future videos, using them to complement things like the Philosophy and Ethics series, where I delve deeper into the choices and stories of games like Red Dead Redemption, The Walking Dead, Detroit Become Human, and many others. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. I'm also looking for feedback and suggestions in the comments below. Are there any topics that you'd like to see covered? Is there anything I talked about in this video that you'd like me to expand on? Let me know with a comment. For those who are looking for other ways to support the channel, or who like things like early access to videos, having their name in the credits, and other cool perks, I've got channel memberships and a Patreon. The Patreon is linked in the description, and memberships are available through a button here on YouTube. For now, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.